Ecco, go live.
Yeah, we are. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
I'm sharing my screen. Today, Giovanni, Asproni, and myself will talk with you about adopting Agile at scale and achieving agility at scale. And we are going to present you an approach that is based not on scaled framework, but instead is based on principles. When we talk about scaling today, we mean a situation where we go from one small team working on one single product to a situation where we have many teams working together on the same delivery initiative or on the same product. Or we talk about the situation where we have a small company, a small startup that is agile from the beginning, and a company that is growing to become a large but still agile organization, or a situation where we have an existing large and traditional organization that want to adopt agile everywhere. So the agenda for today, today's presentation is divided into parts. Initially, we will have this frontal presentation. Soon, we will give you an overview of the typical problems that companies face when scaling Agile. And then we will present you a solution based on the principles. On the second part, there will be a Q&A using the tool that is in front of you. And please start to post your questions already during the presentation. The work that we are presenting today is the result of the work done by Giovanni, Asproni, and myself, but it is also the result of a community effort. So what you are looking at is not a proprietary work, but is like open source with the many contributors.
Yeah, well, hi everybody, I'm Giovanni. So just a bit of an introduction about myself. So why am I entitled to speak about these things? So I spent my career mostly in medium and large scale projects. And the examples here in the slides are actually the biggest ones I've been involved with. In both I was a consultant, and I was hired to actually review the situation and recommend ways to get the projects in a better state. One interesting aspect is that both for these projects and others I've been involved with, despite being in different domains, they experience tend to be very similar and are also very common. Yeah. Next.
Yes. So I'm Luca Minudel, and I started working with the lean and agile way of working since the very beginning. At the time, agile software development started and was all about software development. I work in an organization that adopted lean and agile in the technology department, in the software development, but also beyond software development. And I work with multiple teams, multiple products, and in adopting Agile in the whole organization. So this is about Giovanni and myself, but please feel free to use the chat and introduce yourself to the rest of the audience. As I mentioned, we will do a long Q&A at the end of the session. So please feel free to start posting and voting your question already during our presentation.
Okay, so the loops of doom. So this is kind of a justification of, or one of the reasons why we are promoting this principle. So we here will be illustrating a typical situation that our principles help to address. So we're thinking about a complex system, that has been around for a while. So there is lots of accidental complexity. So it's maybe the code is not perfect. There are things that needs to be changed. The architecture is not perfect. Things like this. Often there is still a big backlog of things to do, of features that our stakeholders want. And generally, there is also not a lot of time to do much. And also in these situations, often these legacy systems offer a set of distinct services and not necessarily related to each other. So there is also what is known as the Zavinsky law of software development that says that every program attempts to expand until it can read email, which is literally true for several systems that are actually working. Next, Luca. So in this situation, often things with lots to do, technical complexity, the product is complicated, and happens that all these things together slow progress down. Yeah. So we are in a situation where there are generally tight deadlines and the progress is very slow. Next. So a typical reaction to this situation is to add more people or more teams. Yeah, if it is a large scale, we are talking about teams. I've seen situations where the typical thing was to add the unit was one team of at least 10 people added to the time. In attempt to make things faster. You know, it's like there is lots to do. We split the things to do among other people. We add more, we'll go faster. But then something else happens. Next, Luca. So adding more people actually adds to the communication overhead. Means more communication channels, more opportunities to actually misunderstand each other. So the net effect of this is that actually instead of going faster, what we do is something else. That is next. We go into, okay, that is with this communication overhead and sometimes miscommunication, what happens is that the accidental complexity of the system actually gets worse, and the progress gets even slower. And then what happens is that slow progress, we add even more people and so on and so forth. Loops of this in the attempt to address the problem, we actually make it worse because we are addressing it in the wrong way. We are not addressing the real issue. We are addressing some superficial symptoms. Next.
So these and many other problems become quite recurrent when organizations try to scale agility and adopt agile at scale, focusing on frameworks, especially scaled frameworks. It has been a while since organizations tried to do that, and we hear again and again a set of common problems coming back. So what Giovanni and myself are suggesting is to adopt a different approach that is based on principles. The idea is to drive our adoption of Agile at scale, to drive our initiative to become, to create agility at scale using principles, patterns, and practices in a way that fit your unique context of your organization. So the idea is to start to drive the adoption of Agile at scale from the beginning, being guided by these principles. If your company instead is already using a scaled framework, doing some kind of transformation following scaled framework, you can still use these principles, try to re-energize your current initiative and to redirect your effort where they can make the biggest impact. So now I'm sharing with you a link in the chat, a link to the page where all the principles are documented. And we are asking you, we are suggesting you to go and visit the website now during the presentation so that you can see in detail the principle that we are mentioning, and look deeper while we are giving you an overview of all the principles. So please open the URL that I have just shared in the chat, and on the welcome visitor page, have a look at the link on the top of the list. When you click that link, that is Agile at Scale Generative Principle, you will see another page open side by side, and there you will see the page dedicated to the principles. You will see two more links on the top of the page. The part one that I'm going to present to you very quickly, and then part two. You can click again those two links and see in details all the principles. So I'm giving you a little more time to actually open the principles, open the page in your browser, and when you're done, if you can give me a thumb up or a comment on the chat, that will be good. Okay. I think we can move forward. I mentioned the principles. The principles are organized in two parts broadly. The first part is about unwinding the dependency spiral and dealing with the most common causes that push us to scale, to try to scale Agile. And the second we will discuss, part two, is about collaborating at scale.
So now there will be the introduction to the first core principle, which basically say that about saying that scaling up is not always the best answer. Descaling the problem is often a better one, or at least a better starting point. Next, Luca. So the first one is what we call the fundamental law of scaling, which is obvious but is often forgotten. That basically says the scaling amplifies the bad and makes the good more difficult. So what does it mean? It means that there is scaling up as always a price tag attached. So specifically, all problems you might have get amplified. So for example, if communication channels are a bottleneck, adding more people, scaling up will make a bottleneck, will make it a worse bottleneck. Or if you have already issues with, say, pull requests waiting forever to be approved, if you add even more teams, there will be more pull requests waiting for longer, things like this. But also everything that is working well will require a bigger effort to keep working well. So let's say that you have a beautiful continuous integration that works smoothly with and everything is fine. But then as you add new teams, you probably need to support them in some ways. So maybe adding new environments, new pipelines, and there will be potentially more conflicts in the continuous integration system. Basically means that you are not going to go to scale up without paying a price for it. Yeah, so it might be the right decision in some context, but it's going to cost you something. And in fact, in the first example we gave, so this is the loops of doom again, basically what was happening here was that scaling up was done, but when the conditions were not right, amplifying the existing issues, in this case, communication overhead, accidental complexity, and everything else. Yeah. Sorry, next, Luca. I think you are one slide behind and I forgot to tell you. Yeah, so basically there was a problem here of trying to go faster, but in a situation where there were a lot of things done wrongly that got on. So next slide. So a better approach that is summarized in principle 2 and 3, you can find in the wiki, is so you want to, for example, 。
Giovanni, let's wait a second. We have a glitch in the connection. So Giovanni is presenting to us principles number 2 and 3. If you open the link in your browser and you look at part 1, you can see in details the principles 2 and 3 that Giovanni is describing to you. And those principles are about dealing with the complexity of the system that is created by decision that we make. Complexities that we introduce in our system, and as a consequence, we reduce the productivity and we slow down the development. And so we end up feeling the need to employ more people, involve more persons to do the work, involve more people to coordinate the work, and we end up in a situation where the number of people involved is so big that we think we need to scale Agile in order to deal with this large number of teams. But in reality, the problem that we are facing is created in the first place by all these dependencies. Giovanni, go ahead.
I had a problem. Sorry, I had an internet connectivity problem. I apologize. So I was saying the first step, reduce accidental complexity, maybe add better automation, test automation to make the system easier to maintain and evolve. Or if the system is doing lots of things, different services, try to split it into different independent and more cohesive services. So this is a situation where often, for example, modern teams split a monolith into services, into microservices, sometimes to make it easier to evolve it independently, simply because there are sets of unrelated services that are provided by the monolith. And then also reduce feature bloat. Focus on what is really important for users, reduce the amount of work while delivering more value. This is, again, very important, but often difficult to attain because people really want all the features instead of thinking about what is really, really necessary. Next.
So once we have removed all the problem that Giovanni just described, once we have reduced the unnecessary dependencies, we have simplified the problem, and we are in a good situation. When we are there, and still we see that we need to scale Agile, adopt Agile at scale and achieve agility, because even when we have decouple and remove unnecessary dependencies, the number of people involved and the effort require a large number of people working together. So when we are in that situation, this is where part 2 of the principles comes into play, because part 2 of the principles tell us how we can scale in a way that is effective. And one of the key elements of the principles in this part 2 is to adopt an empirical approach. It is like being in a perpetual state of research and development in our way of working, as opposed to try to adopt an end state target operating model of the way that our team and our organization work. So one key idea here is to apply lean principles, agile principles, and complexity principles to the way that the teams and departments collaborate with each other. So you see, the typical way of adopting Agile is to adopt Agile inside the team. So you see the circles in the image, you adopt Agile internally. What I'm telling you is to adopt Agile to the connection, to the interactions, to the collaboration between different teams and different departments, and on how they collaborate together. So, principle 5 is one of the principles in this second part, is about the ability to collaborate effectively at scale. And these principles point us to the fact that people are the most important and most adaptable element in the organization. If you have attended some training about scaled framework, you will see that there is a lot of focus on very tangible elements such as role, structures, processes. While those elements are very good for training because they are very tangible to talk about, they are really very little relevant for the success of your initiative of achieving agility at scale. What is relevant instead is another set of things that are less tangible but extremely more important and relevant. And these things are the collaboration between different team and organization, the relationship of trust inside the team and across teams, and the sense of safety that there is in that relationship. Now, I'm talking about collaboration, and it seems like that I'm talking about fluffy things. But what do Giovanni and myself mean in terms of collaboration in practical terms? So every time that you are working on something that requires coordination between multiple teams, collaborating means coordinating the work that you have to do together, working together to remove or to relax the existing dependency or handle the existing dependencies. It means experimenting and finding the right way to collaborate and coordinate in each case. So instead of adopting fixed practices, for example, like using Scrum of Scrum, finding the right way to collaborate for each one of you, amplifying what is working well, and sharing ideas and patterns of what is working inside the organization so that other teams can find inspiration and eventually ideas that they can experiment to see if those ideas works well for them too. The next principles to look at is principle number 6. And principle number 6 tells us don't scale it until you nail it. So when you're working in an organization where all the teams or most of the teams are not doing well in terms of lean and agile way of working, reality is that there is nothing to scale. If what you have is a mess and you start there, you will end up scaling the mess. Instead, these principles suggest to start small, to start focusing on one single team first, and start to understand what is needed to make that team work really well. And when you have one team, then you make it work with two teams. And only when you have something that is working well, you start to scale that things that is working well. Before then, there really is nothing good to scale. Several organizations, when we look at our own experience, Giovanni and myself, and we also look at the case studies published by organizations that successfully achieve agility at scale, we say that many among those organizations started adopting Agile at team level as an experiment. The drive to adopt Agile at team level initially was bottom-up. Teams, software developers, testers, product managers wanted to try a different way of working to become more effective. And the success of that experiment convinced the whole organization to adopt Agile also beyond the single team. So this is where, from bottom-up drive, the organization also had a top-down drive. Those two coming together. And this is one of the most common approaches, successful approaches that we noticed. Principle 7 and number 9 instead tell us how to actually scale, and they suggest to use an empirical approach. This means making small experiments, looking at the result of the experiment and learning from it. And so from those, use those learning to adapt and evolve our own way of working. And when you do this experiment, when you figure out which experiment you want to try, which idea you would like to try to apply, you can be inspired by the principles that you find from lean software development, lean product management in general, from the Agile Manifesto, from the principles that you find described in the various original framework, for example, extreme programming, or Scrum or Kanban. And then you can also use the theory and the principle of human complexity. Another element that is very important is using indicators, quantitative and or qualitative indicators that help us understand if what we are doing is working well. And this is where Giovanni will tell us more about these indicators.
So that is one of the principle 8 in this case that says one important thing: the scaling has always a hard limit. So this means that in a given initiative you cannot scale indefinitely, which is should be kind of obvious, but it isn't. So I've seen projects going up to 500-800 people, like 80 teams, something like this, where adding teams was actually making everything worse. Now, there is a reason for that. Yeah. So the reason is that a project with multiple teams is a concurrent system. Yeah, and like any other concurrent system, the maximum amount of parallel work is limited by parallel work that can be done is limited by the amount of sequential work that needs to be done. So if you have come across the mythical man month, this is also what is the Brooks law for teams. You know, when he said that adding people to a late project made it later. Yeah, but it's also equivalent to Amdahl's law for systems. So it's the same thing, which means if you look at the picture here, is something like this. So here on the horizontal axis, there is the number of teams. On the vertical, deliverable throughput. Think about features. Yeah, one team will deliver something, two teams a bit more, three teams a bit more. So at least this is the idea. But now, what is often hoped for is a linear increase. So two teams deliver twice as much as one team, three teams, three times as much, and things like this. Amdahl's law, instead, that takes into account the amount of sequential work, says that actually there is a theoretical limit. So there is a cap above which you cannot go, which is basically determined by the amount of sequential work. Reality, both in concurrent systems, like multi-thread and concurrent systems as in software, but also in teams, is that we don't go up to the theoretical limit, we will go much lower and then drops. Yeah. So this means that, and another important thing is that when the things scale up, actually sublinear as well. So two teams is not twice as much as one team, but it's like 1 point something times as one team in this case. Yeah. So what is sequential work in a situation of multiple teams? The sequential work is anything that requires coordination. So, for example, when people need to talk to each other to agree on something, you know, typical things, to teams that have to agree on some API, some interfaces. So that is coordination work. Things about putting a new continuous integration, creating a new pipeline, fixing continuous integration, pull requests are sequential work, refinement of requirements that affect several teams, meetings, all these things. Anytime there are teams waiting for others or talking with others, that is sequential work that affects the ability of the teams to work in parallel. Yeah. And unfortunately, this limit is generally reached much earlier than usually expected. So, the problem is, how do we know that the limit has been reached? So it's not an exact science. Unfortunately, there are no formulas that can tell you, look, in this particular initiative, you can go up to 10 teams and it'll be fine. Or if you put 12, you'll have a problem. So you need to do something else. So some things that you need to do is basically put some indicators there to see what is happening to the system. So if there are often teams that are waiting for others, yeah, and this happens more and more often, this is a sign that probably the limit has already been reached. I think we lost Luca. Okay, I'll share my screen while I'll try to share my screen while we wait for Luca. Sorry for today, since the internet is playing tricks on us. So let me share. Let me share.
I'm here. Can you see me?
Yeah. Can you share again? Can you share again? I was about to share my screen. Today, the internet is playing tricks on us. Okay, so I was talking about indicators. So what you can do is, like, first of all, if you notice that there are things that are often waiting, it's a sign that you've already got a problem. Yeah. But another sign could be if there are things that are often struggling to keep up. They need help. There is a lot to do, and they need help. A good way to figure out if they really need help is just ask. Yeah. So they know if there is parallel work that can be done. So generally, asking the teams is a good thing. But also implementing metrics, for example, metrics about throughput, lead time, effect trends, to assess the effects of the decisions can be really good, because basically what happens is, if you have some baseline for these metrics, if you add the new teams and you see the throughput going down or the defect trends going up, you probably need to roll back the decision. One thing that is important to remember is that these effects on these metrics are kind of, they are not instantaneous. So every time you add people or new teams, you have to expect that at the beginning things will go a bit slower, and then if things are if scaling up was the right choice, they will pick up again. Okay, so it's not an immediate going faster. So it's a bit of an art, a bit how to check that. So there are ways to deal with the problem, but they require some work, some metrics, and the most important thing is you are not going to be able to scale indefinitely for a given initiative. Okay, next.
So now we give you some time to use the Q&A sections on Pine to ask questions. I'm also posting, and I have posted some links related to the material that we are presenting. And now we are giving you some time to think about if you have any question. And while we give you some time, I would like to take a step back and look at two key topics that Giovanni and myself described. In part one, Giovanni, are you there with us?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, in part one, the focus was on technical excellence and on product decisions to avoid creating unnecessary complexity in order to avoid a false need of scaling. So technical excellence and product excellence, that's one of the two pillars that we discussed. The second pillar is the human side of things, collaborating together, coordinating each other trusting each other and working well together. So you see the people side of things and the technical and product side of things coming together. And the third element that join those two ingredients is deconstructing the framework and instead going back to the basics, to the principles, to the patterns, to the practices that come from the original frameworks. And so I take the opportunity to ask something to Giovanni about what is his opinion related to frameworks and scaled framework as compared to the principles and the basics.
Well, the problem with frameworks, agile frameworks, scale frameworks are like software frameworks. Basically, frameworks assume a context. Okay, so if the context is right for the framework may work for you. If it isn't, the framework will not. So, and the problem with these scale frameworks and agile frameworks is that actually very few projects, very few initiatives generally fit the right context for them. Yeah, and so usually what companies doing, for example, they try to use safe or less. So this kind of frameworks try to do is to, instead of understanding the context and they try to shoehorn their context, what the framework expects, and end up in a situation where instead of they actually get much worse. And you can see a sign of this when doing things in the right way. Yeah, so we must do this particular meeting because this is what the framework tells us. Instead of focusing on what they need to do and how to improve and how to produce better value, they start focusing on the various bits and bobs of the process. That is a sure sign that things are not going as expected. So, and also, in my experience, even in big projects, usually you need much less than what you think to make things work smoothly. Often just encouraging communication, clarifying goals to everybody, making sure that everybody understands the goal of the system and that placing it goes a long way to improve the situation.
And exactly on that topic, Giovanni, what about the human element? Because that's the second big topic that we cover in this presentation. What is your leadership style? How do you bring the human element in your leadership style when you work with people at scale?
So the human element is actually fundamental because we've known for a long time that people doing the work, doing this kind of knowledge work, is called, need to have some level of self-motivation. They have to do what they are doing. They have to find what they are doing engaging, interesting, motivating. So it is extremely important to make sure that people in the teams are actually engaged and to do their best. So this means that they need to be involved in all the decisions that affect them. So this means, for example, you want the team to work on the requirements from the very beginning, be involved with the product owners and stakeholders, understand the requirements, have an ability to actually provide ideas on how to solve the problems, basically own the system. Yeah, and it's extremely important that also they understand the goals of the system and they find those goals challenging enough, yeah, but not unreachable. So personally, my preferred leadership style for this is actually you want your managers or people in a leadership position to work with a create space for the teams to achieve that. So not a command and control, but a more decentralized approach where the teams are assumed to be made of experts. They know what they are doing. And so all you need to do is to give them the space to do their jobs.
Yes, talking about the people side of things, I think we can go back to the three pillars of modern way of working that really are agile as intended from the beginning, lean, and the complexity science. Complexity science is from a theoretical point of view, very important when we look at organization and we want to scale organization. But when we look at the complexity science, it's important that we look at the human side of complexity science, social complexity and human complexity. And this brings us back to the centrality of the human element. When we look at the organization through the lens of complexity science, we realize that many organizations nowadays are still optimized for a way of working that is about mass production and manufacturing, where human beings are intended to execute the pre-designed task as robots. Sorry, Giovanni, all good?
Yeah, all good, all good.
And even today, when we are working in organizations that are creating digital products, providing digital services, developing software, we find that a lot of things about how the organization think, how the organization work, is built on the assumption that come from this manufacturing mindset. Let me make some practical example. Let's think about the performance review. Performance review, this idea, individual performance review, this idea of using the stick and the carrot in order to motivate people to act as they are told. This is perfect for a manufacturing environment, but in a modern organization, instead we want individuals to take initiatives, to be creative, to do things that are unexpected in order to create more value. So as individuals, we want to give them freedom, and then we want to encourage, support, and reward teamwork and collaboration, because the unit of work in modern organization is the team. Think about how difficult it is to create an effective team in sport, create a winning football team, for example. Another example of this way of thinking that comes from from old manufacturing organization is about removing variation. This idea that we want to remove variation, we want to create harmony, and we want everyone to follow the same standard, the same target operating model. Instead, complexity tells us that diversity, cognitive diversity, background diversity is fundamental to allow the team to self-organize. That diversity of idea and that conflict is essential, because when there is trust and safety and disagreement is encouraged, conflict become a starting point for conversation that allow us to create new ideas. So you see that how the human element is important, and how self-organization and looking at people in a different way is fundamental when we want to scale.
Yes. Yeah, and that's basically the best way to scale. Also, because if you use the skills people naturally have, you end up in a situation where you have a decentralized system where some decision making can happen in parallel, and avoid the weaknesses of command and control. The major weakness is that, and you might have seen this in command and control environments, is not around. Nobody does anything, not because they are slackers, simply because they don't know what to do. When you are used to take orders, you don't know how to take the initiative. This is, in fact, one of the problems I've seen in teams where I've been called to help, that people in the teams were never taking the initiative because they were used to being given orders about what to do. So, and if you try to scale in those situations, you won't go anywhere. Yeah. So there will be just a gigantic bottleneck, everybody waiting for somebody to take a decision.
Seems like a perfect way to finish our session. We have just a few seconds. So thank you, everyone. And if you want to get in touch with Giovanni and myself, you find our contacts in our profile. Get in touch on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.